Good afternoon, fellow ruminators. Welcome back to another session, Rumination with Andrew. Thank you so much for joining as we are about to discuss a very important topical matter. And this afternoon, we're going to examine the whole is it PEP, not PET, but PEP examination results and the whole matter that our educational system is in shambles. Now, every year we react to the fact that we are not doing well educationally as a society, that our literacy rate and numeracy rates are very low. We react, and it's always reactionary, 9-day wonder, and then next year the same situation comes back to haunt us, and we continue along that path. A lot of times we do know what the root causes of the problem are. However, we choose to focus on the symptoms as the world normally does. People no longer looks at symptoms. Like I talk about the war in Iran yesterday, that the war in Iran is not an Israel war. It is the US's war. It is the US's understanding of where it sees itself wanting to achieve full spectrum dominance. And that is what people are looking at the APAC, and that is what they see, and that's the symptom. It's a symptom, but it is not the root cause of the problem. And that is what we have to understand. Now, when we look at Jamaica and we look at the poor numeracy and literacy rates, it doesn't have to just deal with teaching and the classroom. There are lots of other factors that we have to look at. For example, in the case of literacy, we know that this educational system is taught in English, in Jamaica's standard English, right? So if our kids are not speaking English at home, if we do not emphasize the speaking of English in our society, in our workplaces, in politics, in parliament, then who is the role model? Who is the role model, and what is our language? What is our national language? I have been asking that question for a while. We have to decipher that, whether or not we want to remain with the plantation language, which is Jamaican Creole, or we want to forge a new language that we say is our national language. And English should be our national language because we are in the age of globalization. And nobody understands the patois. A few people do, and a few people are very enamored by it. But it doesn't mean, therefore, that the world of business and science are going to be enamored by Creole. They're not. They're not impressed, by the least. Wall Street is not impressed with Jamaican Creole. They probably will use it if they want to find something about a Jamaican and they want to, track whatever language he was using. They do that, but it's not that they're interested in Jamaican Creole. I mean, many Americans are not interested in learning a formal language, whether Spanish or French or Japanese. Many are not. They're just monolingual and they speak their American vernacular of English, and that is what they think the world is all about. And many people are like that in the world too. So we need to understand that we cannot think that we are going to achieve a high literacy rate until we deal with our linguistic challenges or language problems in Jamaica. We have to deal with that. There is no miracle around learning English or gaining high literacy rates. We have to understand that. In fact, what I read this morning coming out of the Gleaner, which I shall be sharing shortly, is that the literacy rate was actually lower than the numeracy rate this year in the PEP exams. That's my understanding of what is happening. Our teachers need also to have a good command, an excellent command of English. And I am here proposing to the teachers' colleges that they now begin to offer courses in conversational classes. They should offer conversational classes in English, so that we can ensure that our teachers gain mastery of the English language. Another thing is that we should also be offering conversational classes from basic school to high school, right through, perhaps throughout university also. Offer conversational classes in English, as you do with a foreign language. And therefore, they can be corrected. But we need to introduce that at our colleges so that our students can know, our college students in training, those who are at the teacher training institutions, they can be trained in terms of how to develop the curriculum from basic school to high school conversational courses. Universities are independent, so they can develop their own courses. But from basic school to high school, students should be encouraged to have conversational classes in English. And it's good for them too because they can express themselves. The problem we are going to have, the first challenge we are going to face, however, is that we can't have our conversational classes and there are 50 students per class. You need at least 15 students per class. Where are we going to get that money from? I don't know. But we always get money to do stupid things. So I think that we should just make the sacrifices and build conversational, whatever you want to build, centers, right? Conversational centers or more classrooms so we can accommodate fewer students and not these large numbers of students that we find in our classrooms. If we do that, I think that we should be able to have our students speaking some amount of English. Now, we're not going to suppress the Creole. What we are going to do is to say you have to speak English. Let us be very, very clear now and be very practical. When you are raising your children like to veer away from what their parents are telling them because that is our rebellious nature. Children like to rebel. We were born in that sort of with that sort of nature, that we rebel against authority. And that is why we saw where Adam and Eve, they rebelled against God. Your curiosity. God has made us with a curious mind. Not that he wants us to do what is evil, but the fact of the matter is that that is the mind that we have. It is for us to resist and for parents to say no, and the consequences that follow if you should resist their authority. Now, if parents can compel students not to steal and force them in some cases, and other values that they want to imbibe in them, they want to inculcate in their children, why can't we do the same for English? Why can't we do the same for English? Because we understand that if they don't get an education, that's also another thing. Why force your child to go to be educated if you think it's not necessary? It is because you think that is something that they need. It's a tool that they need to be able to succeed. It's the same thing now for language. English is a language that they are going to need to succeed. Our literacy exams are produced in English. So if they are actually prepared in English, set in English, why do we then have this sort of dialogue and we want Creole and no, 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 no. We need to force our children to speak English. But in order for us to force them to do that, we, the adults, have to begin now to speak English more frequently. Jamaicans are so shameless nowadays that every YouTube video you go on or TikTok videos you go on, people are even writing their comments in the Creole and they're spelling the Creole and responding in the Creole much better than sometimes they're doing it in English. Right? Because we have created a society now that is very ghetto, and we are using the language of ghetto people, the language of the plantation, and we prefer not to use the language of the courts, the language of parliament, the language of corporate Jamaica, the language of globalization, the language of technology, the language of science. But we expect our kids to master English while not being able to speak it. Now, if they're thinking in the Creole 24 hours, they go to school and they're in these large class sizes. Their teachers can't speak English because, one, if they can speak English and they speak English to the kids, they don't understand or pretend not to understand. Now, what is the difference between my generation, which is we call Generation X, and the generation, the generation that came after me? the millennials and the generation X's and what Y's and whatever you call them, right? What's the difference between these generations and my generation and the one that came before my generation, which is the baby boomers? It's the fact that we had a fear for the teachers. And we know when they demanded that we speak English, that we had to, even if we did not speak with the best vocabulary, but they would help us too. But the fact that you want to go to teacher, you have to go to teacher with some amount of trepidation and a willingness to express yourself intelligently because it's teacher. May I have, good morning, could you please? Okay, we need to move away now from this shameless approach where we think that the Creole is the best thing since sliced bread. Everybody loves the Creole because they love Vibes Cartel, right? And I saw the professor from the University of the West Indies, Dr. Andre Horton, having a statue of himself in Montego Bay and, reminiscing on Vibes Cartel. That reminds him of Vibes Cartel. Well, the vibes reminds him of Vibes Cartel. He had to cement that. A professor at the University of the West Indies. And this is the person that is a role model for him, obviously. The fact that he's even calling him and not even calling the likes of Norman Washington Manley or Michael Manley, he had to imbibe something of Vibes Cartel because that is, if it's not even his role model, that's the role model of his constituents. Right? Because a Vibes Cartel and a Vibes Cartel, and we love that ghetto culture. And look at where Vibes Cartel is now. Vibes Cartel can move to the US and he can live his life. The other day, he was supposed to have had a concert in Trinidad, and they paid him, or they paid him even before he went there. They paid him millions of dollars. I think it was 96 million US dollars. And he had not even gone there. Right? But that was the pre-arranged sum of money that he received for not even performing. And yet our kids there in Jamaica are acknowledging, are thinking that Vibes Carter is their role model, when he's not. He's not. He's one in many who might have, out of many who might have been able to be lucky and fortunate to have run with the right person. And we know that the life of Vibes Cartel has not been pristine, Claire, has not been a life that one with a decent mind would want to emulate. Okay, and we can say that about our dancehall musicians and the fact that they're also pushing the Creole. Gone are the days when reggae music would also they sing in English. They would sing in English. You went to the bank and the bank, whatever, the teller spoke to you in English. You listen to our politicians, they sounded like university lecturers in which they had a great command, a good command of standard English. And you can look at the difference between the crop of politicians in the baby boomer years, my generation and the generation that came afterwards. There is a stark difference between how the Mike Henrys speak and the Damon Crawfords, and how the Michael Manley speaks, even though he was special. But I think that the politicians of yesteryear had a certain command of the English language. And I'm not suggesting now that when they went out to their certain constituency, they would not, revert and they would be able to code switch, which they did so comfortably. But for the most part, when they're speaking, you could see that these men have been to school and they went through a system of education that taught them and trained them and refined them into upstanding citizens. We are confused now because we think that if we should put English as the major language of national development, it means that we are denying our African heritage. That's nonsense. That is utter nonsense. We cannot live in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th, and 20th century. We have to live in the 21st century. And even our forebears, even our ancestors, rather, would have endorsed that their posterity those who came after them that they would educate themselves, that they would be using all the tools of the slave masters so that they will be able to survive and to compete with their slave masters. They would have endorsed that. Instead, we think that when we encourage our students to speak Creole, we are solidifying the fact that we're Black and we're African. And this Blackness thing that is coming from North America is toxic. And I have seen it. And it's not helping Black Americans. It's sending them also back on the plantation. This constant consciousness, having this constant consciousness that you're Black, and all of the psychological thoughts that come with that is making us look more inferior. We need to understand that we're living in Western societies, and we have to adapt. We can't go back to when we were in Africa and we don't even know. We like to also have these delusional understandings of Africa and what we used to be. We used to be kings, and everybody was a king. Now, everybody was a king. How were they captured and sent to the New World? If everybody was a king, we were kings and queens because it's therapeutic, because we know that nothing much is going on for us in this Western Hemisphere. But we are the ones who have paralyzed to a great extent, particularly after slavery. We have paralyzed our history, because even in Jamaica, or social progress and economic progress, because even in Jamaica, if we had decided that we were going to educate our people, that would have been the first step toward national development. But we decided that we were not going to do that. The elites didn't want that to happen, and it will never happen under their watch. It will never happen under their watch. And they're the ones, too, who are behind the Carolyn Coopers and the Chabonish, what's his name? The one that is the head of the linguistics department at UWI. They're behind these people, right? Because they understand that if Jamaicans should master English, and if they become educated, they would have passed their nest. And you can't pass your nest with them. They will allow a few, and most of the few who have mastered English, they've end up migrating anyway, right? They immigrate to other countries. So if we want to improve on our literacy rate, we have to speak English. We have to find a way in how we can master standard Jamaican standard English. Notice we didn't say British Standard English, we said Jamaican Standard English, which is equivalent to any form of English around the world. It's standard. Yes, there are certain lexicon, there might be certain vocabularies that we might use, but that will not make us not be understood. We'll be understood. Okay, but we're not going to be understood if we're speaking the Jamaican vernacular. Okay, another thing, we have to create a society in which children are encouraged to read. Now, Mr. Siaga, during his time in office, he used to have books, free books, mathematics book, and also reading books for us to use in the primary school system. We should go back to those days. We have to revert to those days. We should rehash those days and send free of cost, or very cheap, could be like for $20 or less, just to give to help out with the production, right? We could make these books very cheap. Or guess what? We're wasting money anyway, so make them free of cost that our kids can read. And if I remember well, it was not just one book. We had like 5 or maybe 6 reading books free of cost. And you had math books to accompany them. And it helped the teacher to prepare for his or her teaching and reading classes. And we would go outside and they would read, the kids would read. Okay? We have to revisit those days, because what we have done, we have created a society in which we have moved backward economically, and then we expect our teachers to keep current with what is happening. We have encouraged antisocial behavior, and yet we expect when we send our kids to school, teachers will correct these antisocial behaviors. But if the politicians and all of the leaders are behaving similarly, because when you hear a politician speak right now, sometimes you don't see the difference between he and the person on the street. There's no difference between that person and the person on the streets. Our politicians are also lacking in terms of civility, courtesy, decency, and then we expect our children to do well. You know, gone are the days, for example, in the Seventh-day Adventist Church to which I belong, the pastors would speak also, for the most part, in standard English. Now, I was watching this pastor some weeks ago, and I had to, come off the thing because everything he was saying in Montego Bay was in the Creole, pandering again to the people, pandering what he thinks he's pandering to the people. But God is a God of high standards. God is a God of very high standards. All the universities in the world, the best of the best, cannot be compared. They cannot even stand in the presence of his standard. Yet we think that, and I'm not suggesting now that sometimes we may not have to go to meet people to bring them up. God does that. He comes down low, which he did. He came and he died for us, didn't he? But he didn't remain here. He came to lift us up. And that is what we are supposed to do. As teachers, I'm not suggesting you're going to beat your kids if they don't speak English, but you are going to correct them. And parents, you must also be okay if your children have some trepidation for the teachers. It will do them well. There needs to be some amount of trepidation for teachers. And not that they're going to beat you and they're going to kill you and whatever, but they have a standard that when you go before them, you make sure that your words are properly constructed. And you shake, if not, because you understand that the professor or the teacher demands a high standard. But we're living in a society now in which if that happens, oh, the child is psychologically damaged by the teacher. Right? But the child is not psychologically damaged when we understand that eventually the child is going to have to deal with no job when he becomes an adult. Even before he becomes an adult, he won't pass his PEP. He will not be able to pass his CXCs. He can't go on to college. He's not employable. Okay? So we are damaging our kids because of all of these ideologies coming out of the university. And they're mainly American liberal ideologies, which are toxic. American liberalism in the United States, as you know, particularly that comes from the Democratic Party, is toxic. Anybody who votes for the Democratic Party, I'm not political, but if you understand the social ideology of the Democratic Party and of a lot of what they call progressivism in the United States and around the world, you would be shocked. They're not going to help our society. We need to have some amount of conservatism in our values. I'm not saying that we should be racist and we should be classist. That's not what conservatism is about. That's political. Right? That is political. I am talking about having some basic standards that we used to have. English is a very important language. It should be spoken in the classroom, and it should be insisted that it be spoken. And no amount of the fact that my parents don't speak English, it should not matter. Because for many of us who grew up in Jamaica, our parents didn't speak English. But at school, we were expected to speak English. And our parents would be very happy when we came home and we were using language and words that they didn't even understand, vocabulary that they didn't understand. Right? They would be happy because they said, my child, he might learn. He might learn. I'm proud of him. I'm proud of him. I go to Kingston College and him go Westwood, or she go Westwood or wherever she's going. They would be proud of their children because they understood that teachers meant their children well, and what they were trying to inculcate in their children are values that be will be very useful to them and advantageous to them in the future. But no, we're giving now our teachers less autonomy. And because they don't have any autonomy in the classroom, they can't help our children because we have all of these standardized exams as they have in the United States, and they must be able to accomplish these standards and these norms, and they achieve nothing. They end up achieving nothing. All of these standardized exam people. That's why I'm against this certification of teachers. It is going to cause the teachers, it's going to create for them less autonomy because they want to centralize the system and make it that somebody at the top control the system. And you know, when a one man controls the system, it becomes even more corrupt. The larger the bureaucracy, it's the more corrupt the system becomes. The American system of education is not our example, particularly the public school. It's just not our example. And we are heading in a direction in which we are also going to damage our children. And we have already been damaging them even from day one. But if we had just built on the system that the British had left us, and we can tweak it here and there to some extent, we wouldn't be in this position right now. But we're trying right now to deny that we have some amount of British heritage. We're trying to say we're just Africa. We're African now, we have to, and to be African in our days, in our vernacular, in our understanding, it means therefore that we should be socially backward, we should be economically impoverished, and we must always be dancing and be party lovers 24 hours a day, because that is the African spirit. The European spirit is to produce and to be civilized. But no, we're rejecting that because they were once our slave masters and we can't afford to work in their system. But you are in their system. You, whether you like it or not, you are operating in their system. And you like to buy from their system, don't you? Aren't you buying from Amazon? And most of the clothes that you wear come from them and their production centers, their foods that you eat. Okay? And I can go on and on and on. What are Black people producing? Absolutely nothing. Yet we are talking about, oh, we want to speak our Creole. Oh, we want to speak our Ebonics. What are you producing in Ebonics? And what are you producing in the Jamaican Creole? Absolutely nothing more than entertainment, and you dance and you sing and you go to sports and you entertain them and they laugh at you. What a set of people who are not serious about forward thinking and behaving like rational people. But let us look at some of what the Gleaner is suggesting about the PEP exam, right? There is an article this morning that came, letter of the day, literacy must be developed at multiple levels. But before I go on to that, there was something that came from the Gleaner this morning, numeracy literacy to be pepped up at grade 6 level next year. All right, and students sitting the primary exit profile, the PEP examination next year will be tested on numeracy and literacy at the grade 6 level. Senator Dr. Dana Morris Dixon, Minister of Education, Skills, Youth and Information, has announced. The evaluation would usually be conducted at grade 4, but Morris Dixon said there is value in adding this component to the final level as well. All the talks, you know, and it's not going to help the children. Next year, we will be able to give you data on the percentage that are considered literate. Yeah, percentage, but are they really literate? Because some of them in the developing category, it is not like they are not literate. And so we need to be able to tease that out and give Jamaica data that they will use, she said. Listen to this. A total of 33,462 students registered across 964 institutions sat the examinations for the 2024-2025 academic year. However, only 2% of students received highly proficient scores in language arts. Of the 33,462 students who sat the PEP exam, only 2% of students received highly proficient scores in language arts, and while 7% were highly proficient in mathematics. So even mathematics they're doing better at. And you should be asking the question why? Because we do not focus on language development. We are ignoring the whole language problem to our detriment. And I've been saying that. We have been saying that. We cannot continue to ignore the language problem because it is going to come back to haunt us. Okay? Now, Damon Crawford had he was making some pronouncements the other day about the whole matter of literacy, in which he suggested that, by the way, in 2015, and that was under the PNP government, I'm not sure if he's, being partisan in this way or he's just speaking the truth. I don't know. But he says in 2015, Jamaica's national literacy rate was at 86%. In 2000, fast forward to 2024, it stood at 67%. So it took a big dive from 86% to 67%. That, if that is true, that is very, very shocking. And it means, therefore, that we're regressing and not progressing. Now, we have here the PNP promises to address low literacy rates, and this is coming from the Jamaica Observer. Crawford advances concept introduced by former Education Minister Ruel Reid. And that's good. If he's going to use the concept from Ruel Reid, and he's a PNP minister, it shows that Damon Crawford is forward-thinking, because he's not trying to be partisan here. He's trying to do what is in the best interest of Jamaica. And if that is what he's going to do, we should applaud Damon Crawford, because he's not just saying because it came from Ruel Reid, who is a JLP supporter and member and was a minister. Okay? He's not going to say, okay, it's my idea. And if it's not my idea, and even if it doesn't work, even if my idea doesn't work, I'm going to go with it. He's not doing that. He's saying that Ruel Reid's agenda, his proposition, his proposal was good, and he's going to use it should the PNP win the election. Applause to you. I applaud you, Senator Damon Crawford. Charging that the government is clueless in its response to the country's low literacy rate or level, Opposition People's National Party spokesman on education and community development, Senator Damon Crawford, said his party intends to correct the problem with the use of a bottom-up approach to include the construction of 1,000 brain builders centers for toddlers. Well, I am suggesting here that we need to get the literacy rate correct. We need to correct the literacy rate at the primary school level. Okay, not at the basic school level. Because even if they know they get some reading readiness for the basic schools, if they go to the primary school level and, I think when they get to 7 is when kids now begin to understand the importance of reading. Okay? Now, so I think that we need to correct it at the primary school level, Damon Crawford. According to Crawford, the concept, which was introduced by former Education, Youth and Information Minister Senator Ruel Reid in 2018, barely made it out of the blocks because of budgetary constraints and Reid's fall from grace in 2019, following allegations of corruption and misuse of public funds. Now, it's amazing how they didn't have the funds according to what Damon Crawford is proposing here, is intimating. Yet, Ruel Reid was able to steal so much money. He was able to steal. Now, the fact of the matter is that Ruel Reid was caught. How many of our politicians are worse than Ruel Reid, which I believe there are, and have not been caught? And the quantity of money, the huge sums of money that they might have built from the system, that they might have stolen from the system, do you know where and how much that money could do? But that's Jamaica for you. He told journalists at a news conference at the opposition's Old Hope Road, St. Andrew headquarters on Thursday morning that the party has already secured commitment from some church organizations to enable the centers to operate. The Brain Builder Center was supposed to target the first 3 years of the child's development. To my information, we only built 3. My understanding is that the first 3 years of a child's development is very, very important for moral and social training, which the mother should be doing at home. You know, we are living in a society where parents just send their kids to daycare centers and they put them in under the training of people whom they don't know, who are strangers to them, who might be inculcating in their children values that they do not share. Now, the child at that level is very, very impressionable. In fact, linguists suggest that the child can become, if he or she is learning a native language, can become as a native if the child learns the language from 1 to 3, because the brain there is like a sponge between those years, 1 to 3. Okay, so when we send our children and have our children being going to school and with such impressionable minds and brains, what are we doing? We believe that it is possible for us to build 1,000 centers for brain builders aged 1.5 to 3. Many would ask, how would we afford it? Yes, because how are we going to feed them? We have already contacted many of the churches who are not engaged in activities in the midweek, and some of these churches have indicated that they would be willing to allow their children halls to be noted as brain builders centers that can immediately allow for that intervention and interface. Crawford said. Now, I think, as I'm suggesting, that the literacy rate should be dealt with at the primary school level when they get there at what, age 6, age 7? Can't remember. I think age 6. And we should have conversational classes. We should also look forward to printing books, free books for them to read. Supplementary books, I should say, as well as books that are required for reading in the classroom. So they should be able to be reading in and outside of the classroom. We should also encourage students to write journals. So write journals about each chapter or book that they have read and what their impressions of the book, are, what their likes and their dislikes. And just to give you a summary of the plot, yes, allow them to activate their minds from that level. And if the teacher is going to grade it, at least to put a tick on it, then they will be forced to do it. It's a part of their grade. Okay, so we need to do that. We need also to have conversational classes in English, right? And a part of the conversational classes would be to that they read something the teacher gives them. I think that we used to do that in primary school back in the days. The teacher gives you a passage, or a page to read, and then having read it, she's going to ask you some questions orally on what you have read. So you have to recollect in terms of remember what you've read, and you have to express it in English. And teachers should be able to correct students, look at the common mistakes, the common errors in their speech, and be able to correct them and let the kids know that this is not how it's expressed, but this is the way how it should be expressed. I think also that, Damon Crawford, I think we should now we know the Creole and we know what are some of the common errors, and you should meet with teachers of English to see some of the common errors and the linguistic interference between the Creole and Standard English. What are the common errors? And we should compile a book now with all of those errors that students are likely to make, having graded the CXC exams, the PEP exams, SS. They should know and correct them and say, this is not how you say it in Standard English. This is how you say it in Creole, but this is how you say it in Standard English. And it should be like a Bible for students. And they should know that this is not how you express yourself in Standard English. It is acceptable in the Creole, but it's not acceptable in Standard English. With that, if we do these things, then I think we should be able to master English and to also improve our literacy rate. But make no bones about it also, we need to return autonomy back to our teachers. We need to have, the children need to have some amount of trepidation in their minds about going to language class. Yes, not to be fully afraid, but have a certain degree of fear in them. Yes, it helps. That's the way how teaching is about, because it forces you. Some of our best teachers were the teachers that we feared because they expected the best of us. I remember when I was going to Michael College, and there was a teacher that they called C. She would just give C's. Everybody said, oh, all she gives is C's. She's not going to give you a higher grade. And these were people who specialized in the subject. She is not going to give you a higher grade. And we heard that from, people who were, who she had taught years and who were seasoned teachers or, in the school system. Among, some of her more recent students. And, but what did that do to us? And I never got to see from her, by the way. Always got a very higher grade. And she always, she regarded me as one of her better students. But when I heard that, I realized I had to put out my best effort. You can't just give that teacher. I could not have just given her anything that came out of my mind. I had to think about it strategically. She's hardly ever going to give you an A, but at least she's going to give you a B plus, and a B plus for her is a very high mark. If you get an A, you're perfect. There's nothing on your paper that merits cleaning up. She was just like that. Okay? So, and kids feared her. Not that she was any woman to be feared, a beautiful woman she was. And she was very polite and everything. But when it came on to her marking, she marked up your paper. And she wasn't afraid of marking you down. But the more she did that, it's the more that you said, well, I have to make sure that everything I say is refined and is a carefully thought out idea. And this is what our kids need. But if you take that autonomy away from the teacher and you put it in the hands of the students and you take up for them and you tell them that the teacher is suppressing their vernacular, suppressing their home values, then the child is not going to learn. The child is not going to learn because they understand that the teacher doesn't have autonomy. Do you know that students know when the teacher doesn't have autonomy? They sit and they know. They know. And if they sense that teachers have lost their autonomy by what they're observing in the general society and by what they see in the classroom, in the way in which the parents speak to the teacher, right? And the manner in which the teacher has to be afraid of the children, and they just speak any way they want to speak without putting their words, constructing their sentences appropriately, then we are not going to improve. We've got to go back to the ancient value system. All of this taking data, and it's important, don't get me wrong. Very important that we have data and everything. But if we're not also creating the social conditions and also the economic conditions in which our kids and the intellectual environment, the rich intellectual environment for our children to progress, then I don't think that we are going to succeed where literacy and numeracy are concerned. We've got to get back to the days of where we valued education and we didn't value lot of crime and lot of scamming and all of that. Our kids love that lot of scamming. They don't see any value in education anymore. And if we begin to harness and to revert to our ancient past, where we had values and education was the key to success, as we suggested, as we used to say, then I think we might go back to having, well, I don't think we have ever had a high literacy rate, but we could have a high literacy rate if we use all the tools at our convenience. We have a lot of tools now. We have even online reading books, I'm sure. If you can't produce reading books, go online. And sometimes there are some in PDF forms. And download these books free of cost and make and have your students read. There should be no excuse now for not reading, because there are lots of online books for reading that kids, so the teachers in grades 1, 2, 3, 4 need to go online, look at books that they can read, because they might not have the money to buy the books. So don't force parents to buy books that they can't afford. I mean, the kids don't have the books, so they can't read at home. Read books that most of your kids, if not all of your kids, have access to. And they can read and they can follow what is happening. But I'm sensing that books are so expensive in Jamaica, parents can't afford them, even though the economy is doing well, right? Right? Even though the economy is doing well, parents can't afford books. They can't afford food. So this is my reflection, and I hope that while I applaud Damon Crawford with his forward-thinking brain center or brain centers, brain building centers, whatever he's calling it, and coming from it. In fact, it was a Ron Reed's idea. I commend him, I applaud him for continuing in something that he thinks might be helpful, right? In terms of having our students develop a good reading culture and improving our literacy rate. But having said that, I hope that, people will look at what I have suggested, the proposals that I've made in this video, and that we can begin now to say we have to speak English. We have to speak English. We have to speak the Queen's language or the King's language, as we suggest now, because that's the language of development. That's a language of science. That is a language of literacy, most importantly, and also the language of numeracy. Okay, if we can't master English, then you can also master numeracy. Thank you so much for joining. I hope you like, share, and subscribe. Like the video so the videos can be shared with as many people on the platform. See you in another one. Bye.